I am Lewis Jenkins. Today is August 24, 2018. I am in Jackson, Tennessee to interview Magistrate Judge Ed Bryant. This interview is being conducted as part of the Tennessee Bar Foundation Legal History Project. Good afternoon, Judge Bryant.
Good afternoon to you.
For this interview, would you tell us your full name, please?
Well, it's Edward Glenn Bryant, although no one knows this, but officially my birth certificate is Glee instead of Glenn. And I have no idea, other than a simple mistake at birth, why I have that name, and I changed it to Glenn.
In an actual legal proceeding, you changed it to
right
Glenn?
Out of the chute.
My father-in-law had a similar thing. He was born in New Bern, Tennessee, way back in the end of the 1920s, and the doctor left his house to come deliver him on July the 3rd. So his birth certificate said July the 3rd, but he was actually born on the 4th, and he never got it changed.
Well, I don't think I've ever been punished because of that or had any problems with that. So,
even when you were in the military,
I don't know how I got there, but it's probably closer in campaign things when people look at things like that. And what is your real name?
So, where were you born, please?
I was born here in Jackson at the Webb Williamson Hospital, where the First Methodist Church parking lot is now, just down the street.
So what year were you born?
I was born in 1948.
How long's that hospital been gone?
It has been gone a while, and I assumed when the First Methodist Church started expanding, it went away at that time. But it was the hospital in this area.
And what's the month and day of your birth, please?
I was born September the 7th in 1948.
Who were your parents?
My parents were Alan and Opal Bryant. Alan was, they were both from Mississippi, in different parts of that. And my mother was raised in Pontotoc, Mississippi, and was one of probably 8 or 9 kids, and their father had cotton, and they would pick cotton. My mother was awfully proud of her ability to out-pick her brothers. She was an instrumental force in my life, and over the years, obviously, she has done. I love to talk about her. My father was born, I believe, in Boonville, and I know less about his family than I do my mother's family. And he was an electrician, and I remember him growing up. He would travel with 2 or 3 other people, electricians, and they would go to places like Chicago, Louisiana, and work. And when they weren't working, they were having a good time. Let me put it that way.
For those of us not intimately familiar with Mississippi geography, where is Pontotoc, Mississippi?
You obviously don't know. Pontotoc is where you get your shoes. When you go to Ole Miss, which I did, the first thing you do is go over to Pontotoc and buy cowboy boots. And it is a great shoe store. They have obviously more than cowboy boots, and I bought many a shoe there. And the nice thing about it, I go in there and I'm related to somebody there, and it's fun to do that and to kind of find out that you're related in a town that size. It's easy to have cousins all over the place. As I said, my mother was one of 8, somewhere around 8 children, and they multiplied greatly. And my grandfather used them to pick cotton. And as I think I said that earlier, but it was a large family, and it has just expanded to the point now where we don't have we don't know each other. We've all scattered about the country.
Do they give you any family discount in the shoe store at Pontotoc?
Not yet. I'm working on that, and we're going to have to work on that pontotoc now. It's pontotoc. It has a T in it, but that T is silent. So
that's the Mountaineers' pronunciation of Pontotoc. Is that better? And so, having shown my ignorance of Mississippi geography, you'll also have to tell me, please, where Boonville is.
Well, Boonville is not too far away from the Tennessee border as you go down south. It's around, they're all sort of together. Oxford's close by there, and Ripley, Mississippi, and these are all generally small towns now. And many a great plaintiff's lawyer, Mississippi plaintiff's lawyer, has come out of those areas now over the years, and had great opportunities to file big lawsuits and make lots of money back in those days, well before or well after my family developed. And I was not one of them.
Is this something that's come up in the water in the last 30 or 40 years in north central Mississippi that's caused that?
Well, I think plaintiff's lawyers. It was for a long time a haven, and they were able to have lots of class action cases filed down there, and lots of people made lots of money. And over time, there were other times that they didn't make lots of money. With some, I don't want to get into all that, but there've been some who have had the opportunity to visit the jails around.
Did you know your mother's parents?
I did. They were older. I was a late baby. My mother was probably in her mid to late 40s before she had me. She had my brother, who is 7 years older, who is still, he's over in Georgia now. And she lost a child in between. And so I was the baby and got everything I wanted from my mother. And she was just a wonderful person. She worked the night shift. She was a nurse, as I said, and she worked in the hospital here. And she worked and retired. And over the years, when she retired, we had just come back from the Army. And she was by herself. My father had died. And she would go out and bake things, pies and cakes and things like that. And just go out, sausage and biscuits, and go downtown. And everybody knew her. In fact, when I ran in politics, I was her son. They knew her. But when I first got there, I was a pretty, snotty-nosed guy. I'd been in the Army and everything, and I thought I was pretty hot stuff. And I talked to her one day. I said, "Now, Mother, you're working here in the kitchen, and you're selling these sausages and biscuits, and you're taking them out. And I'm not so sure that you might have to be inspected, and from a standpoint of you're running a business out of the house, you may have to get a license." And she just, no. And one day I got this call from the sheriff's office, and they said, "Is your mother that lady that bakes those cakes?" And I thought a minute, I could take maybe the Fifth Amendment or something here. And I said hesitantly, "Yes, she is." And they said, "Well, Sheriff Roberts was the sheriff." She said, the man said, "Well, Sheriff Roberts is having a birthday, and we want her to bake a cake." And I said, wipe the sweat off. And I later told her, I said, I guess you're okay now. But I got put in the right, proper place.
That's fantastic. Well, anything in particular you remember about your mother's parents that you want to share with us?
Oh, they were just country folks, and I had again a large family there, and I remember we didn't travel much. We didn't have vacations or things like that. What we traveled was to go down to Pontotoc and go down there. And what struck this little city boy as we got there were chickens all over the yard out there. And within just a short time, I would be eating one or two of those. And my mother would go out and just, grab a chicken and wring the neck. And as I said, I'd be eating that chicken. And it was, for this city boy, it was quite an experience. And I never did adapt to that very well.
So you haven't told us this yet, but I'm dying to know whether your grandfather ever impressed you into his service picking cotton.
He never did. I remember he had a beautiful what was that car? It was a Packard, and he kept it in the garage. But he would drive a pickup truck around and about 10 miles an hour on the highway down there, looking on both sides of the road at the cotton. And I would ride with him occasionally. And I just never did adjust to that lifestyle. And but they were good folks. And there were about seven brothers and sisters. And I had a bachelor uncle, Uncle Howard, who had been fought in World War II. He was in a plane that was shot down, and he was captured and kept prisoner by the Germans. But he had gotten nabbed early, or as a plane was taken off, they had to grab him. He was a gunner on the side of the plane, and he grabbed a parachute that was too big or something. And when they did get shot down, he bailed out, as the others did, and he floated further away, and hence was picked up by some Catholic nurses there, and they took him to a hospital, and there was a German there who was there being treated also. And later the Germans came looking for him, and they found their German and my uncle. But he stayed in a long time and never would talk about that much. And we just loved him, though, to death. He was a bachelor for a long time and later married, and was just a good man, really good man. He was postmaster down there at one time.
Postmaster in
Pontotoc. Pontotoc.
I'll get the hang of it before we're finished.
Before we're done, we're going to have that, because you're going to have to go down there and buy some shoes. Give them the McCord discount. That was my mother's maiden name.
It sounds like McCord's may be fairly pervasive in that area of Mississippi.
Well, I served as well, was a fraternity brother with Roger Wicker. We were Sigma Nu's at Ole Miss. And I often told Roger that if he didn't behave himself up there in Washington, that I would go back down to Pontotoc and beat him with my first cousin boat alone. And of course, he's still, and he hadn't caused me to do that yet. He's a good man.
And just for reference purposes, can you tell us who is Roger Wicker?
Oh, Roger Wicker is a United States Senator from Mississippi, and we went up together in that class of the Newt Gingrich contract with America, and we all arrived together there in 1994. Right? Yes.
What about your father's parents? Did you know them?
I really didn't. I didn't know my grandfather on that side. He had passed away. I knew my grandmother, and her name was Ma, and she lived in Memphis, and that was the only traveling we did. Other than to go to Pontotoc, we would go to Memphis and visit her, and she would come up occasionally. And what I most remember about her was she used snuff, and I couldn't figure all that out, and really wasn't interested in it. But I think she was. I have a friend that said that he's from Boston, and his mother came down, and she said, you Southerners down here, you say, well, bless their heart, and then you just slam somebody, but you preface it always with bless his or her heart. And I just about did that. Bless her heart. My grandmother, I really didn't know her very well, and I just was kind of the snuff and the combination of that, not knowing her very well. I did not stay with her much or be with her when she would come up.
You mentioned a minute ago about when you were talking about your mother selling the baked goods, that by the time you got back to Jackson from the Army, and we're skipping just a minute, but how old were you? You mentioned that your father passed away. How old were you when your father passed?
Well, I was in Colorado Springs at the Fort Carson, and Jimmy, our president, Jimmy, the Democrat president, helped me there. Jimmy Carter was elected during that period of time. And so I would have been, that year, I can't think that. I would have been in the Army about 6 years or so.
76, I think he was elected.
It was 76 and 77. And I recall flying back for the funeral down in Mississippi. And we were not close. And my brother was sort of the role model for me on the male side, and my mother, of course. But it seemed like they were my grandparents. My friends' parents were younger, and I quickly figured out I was a late baby. So, and there's an advantage to that. I think I was a little bit more mature for a while, anyway.
Well, that brings me all the way around to your brother, who we want to talk about next. And I think I saw in some of the background material that you provided that your brother is your personal hero. And so tell us about him, please.
Well, he is. He's still alive. He's 7 years young, 7 years older, and he drove a car when I was a kid, and he had something like a '50 Ford hopped up thing. He loved cars. He and I had he had the newspaper route up and down Highland Avenue here in Jackson, and we would throw the newspaper, Commercial Appeal, in the morning. We'd meet downtown and roll the papers, and then we would go out to our route, and I would literally sit in the back window, the back passenger window, and throw the paper over the car to that side of the street. And then he would drive and throw the paper outside the window, his driver's window, left-handed, on the other direction. And it worked great until I threw one on the roof or something like that. But we probably just went on. I don't know. The hardest part of that, and I'm sure it is today, for people who do get the newspaper thrown, is collecting. Nobody wanted to pay, and they would hide from me. And I was just a little kid. He sent me out to collect. Now, he does owe me money. He never paid me anything. And but there were times when I had to take my mother with me to collect, because people would open the door and they wouldn't pay me because I was a little kid. But it was an experience. And but Jim was a great track athlete in Jackson, and was the first first scholarship in track at Union University, and set all the records in the Hall of Fame over there and all those things. And he was really a stellar high hurdler and low hurdles back in those days. I wore his reputation as far as I could in high school, I tried to jump the hurdles, and he ran the hurdles. I jumped the hurdles, and so I wasn't very fast. And while all the other tracksters were running 440s around the mile, the mile, they and throwing up because we had a tough coach and made everybody run except me, because I was over there working the hurdles and having to set them up and get them lined up. And by the time I got them set up and lined up, and then I stretched and everything like that, it was time to tear them down again. So I never did emulate his speed or do very well. But he was through the years. He has been a good model to us. He lives in Georgia, up in the mountains, and a beautiful place up there. It's near Chattanooga. I can't recall the name. It's just a small town, and he is in pretty good health. And he is. I don't see him very often. They stay there, and we kind of stay where we are. But he was a good role model, as I said, for me, and really appreciate what he had done.
The one danger in having a brother that's that much older than you, I've got sons who are 8 years apart, and so but the problem that I noticed with my son, who was 8 years younger than my older son, was that by the time he was about 6 or 7 years old, he thought he was a teenager, and so that sort of changed his outlook on things. Did that happen to you? It's watching your brother.
Well, I asked him questions about things, about what I needed to know about life, and I don't know if he really, trying to think if he really told me a lot of things, but no, he was, he was so far ahead of me, like your two are, that he didn't. I mean, when he did have time for me, which most of the time he didn't have time for me, he did, help me out and do things. But we got closer as I became a teenager, and he ended up teaching in Georgia, and I would go down there and spend summers there with him, and visit in the Stone Mountain, Georgia area, and I went off to college pretty quickly, and it seems like it, and then we sort of went different directions for a long time, and not that there was anything there. He was busy with his life, which had changed somewhat with a divorce, and his children are just been great kids to me. They've been very successful kids, and my nephews, and I know I contributed a lot to them.
Did he make a career of being a school teacher?
He did. He was a principal, and he retired and had a pretty good retirement system. And as I said, moved up into the mountains. And his kids are generally around Georgia. One is at Georgia Tech, and the other one has has a radio podcast. I don't understand all that stuff, but it's how things are made or something goofy. It's young folks. A lot of folks listen to that, and they have occasionally he will mention Jackson, Tennessee, and his remembering his grandmother and the comic books that she had and things like that. And his daughter is married to a Marine general, and they've been in several places around the world, and so they're all sort of back in Georgia now, and so they've all been highly successful. And
so before we move on to something else, I have to ask you what the Marine General's name is.
His actual name it's Karsten Heckel, Helk. It's just Heckel, And he did not go to the academy. He went to Georgia State, which is unusual. A lot of times, I know, my time in the Army that the ring knockers, as they call, that go to West Point or the Naval Academy for the Marines, they tend to make generals more often than the ones that just go to regular college or something. And he's a first-rate, to me, young man. They're still in. He's a 1-star, and he might. The Marines, what the generals do, I understand, is they ask all the generals to submit their retirement letter every year, and they either take it and approve it or they don't. And that's how you find out you've got another year there, or maybe another promotion in line.
Well, I couldn't let the interview go on without putting in a little plug for the Marine Corps, because I know you're going to talk a lot about the Army later on. So I had to bring that in since you mentioned it. And before we move on to school and things like that, so I just want to ask you, what would you say is your most one or two most memorable experiences of your childhood in Jackson?
Oh my goodness! Now, childhood, I would encompass high school through.
Yes,
I would think we used to. I tell you what, we used to live. It seems like everywhere we lived, it's the houses we lived in. It's a different area now, in terms of different folks and everything. And I lived one time we lived on a street, and I'm not going to go into all that, but just the numbers of people that I know that were there, including Wink Martindale, who became a famous quiz show guy for many years. I don't know what, he had several game shows. And Wink lived down there, and his family, but they were just on Burkett Street. And everybody there were multiple children, and you just had a lot of people, a lot of kids, and a lot of fun playing. And we moved around to neighborhoods like that, and I ended up going to a little house by West Jackson School, and that's where I went to grammar school. It's been torn down here in Jackson since then, but I would go home for lunch. I literally lived across a little bitty narrow street, and I'll never forget going home one time, and it's the only time I remember my mother wasn't there with something to eat. And so I kind of rummaged around and found a tomato and a banana, and I ate it, both of those. And then I wrote a note to her, and it was, "I has come and I has gone." And I thought that would be a great obituary. I has come and I has gone. I may use that. I don't know. She kept that note a long time. It disappeared somewhere.
That's pretty good.
I needed a little work on my English, I think, at that time.
You told us that you couldn't have made the success, or you couldn't have had the success as a hurdler that your brother had, but you didn't mention in that same breath that there was a sporting endeavor at which you were particularly adept. So tell us about that.
Well, I thought I was a good basketball player, and but I really wasn't that good. But I played for Coach Turi Oman, who was a legend here, and there is a big facility here called Oman Arena. It's named after him. He came down from the north with a guy named John Pachonik, and back in those days, I don't know why they came down, but they all ended up at Jackson High, the high school I attended and graduated from, and it was a great high school in its day. And those guys were coaches, but they were also brilliant teachers. And Pachonik was just amazing. He was the track coach also. He was the assistant basketball coach, and he taught chemistry. And he was a little short guy, played football at Union, back when Union University had football. And he was a brilliant teacher. And it was a kind of class you would go in. It was a big college-like classroom that you'd see in college, unlike high school, and had a lot of students in there at one time. And you just kept your eyes down. Don't make eye contact with him. I don't want him to call on me. And if you got the answer wrong, he would throw a piece of chalk at you or something. They can't do that now. But he was an institution. And I remember his wife also taught some other course, and the Pechonics. Anybody that went to Jackson High would know him. He later taught at at Lambeth University. But when I was elected to Congress as a Republican in the Newt Gingrich time, as I mentioned, they wrote me a letter when I first got up there. And I'd never thought about teachers or being political, but they apparently were from the other party, and they wrote, being a Democrat, and they wrote me a nice letter. Now, dear Eddie, that's what I was in high school. We know you're not really like that, and it went on to lay out their position on some issue, and I got the biggest kick out of that, and that's one of the regrets I had. I did not keep that letter. I don't know what happened to it. It just, like a lot of the mail, I guess, it just got shuffled away, or somebody may have responded to it from my office. But I love that, dear Eddie. We know you're not like that, and sadly, I was, I guess. But those were good years, and I played basketball, and I loved basketball. And we had a group of guys that ran around together, and we played basketball all the time. And they've been very, very successful folks here and about in Jackson. We still see each other every now and then. So a couple of them one of them became a coach, Tommy Russell, and the Richardson brothers, who are famous in this area of for a lot of reasons. Good people. And Woody Williams was my best friend in high school, and he also had the Pechonic fever and still does. And we respectfully disagree with each other, but he and I were close friends in high school, and co-captains of the basketball team, and that was a good period in my life. It gave me a lot of confidence. I got to go to Boise State and went up there to Tennessee Tech. I was not like Lamar Alexander, the governor. I think I was like an assistant local leader of something, farming or something, I don't know. But I went up there, and while I was up there, I talked to the basketball coach and talked him into letting me walk on. And they needed, when I got up there that fall, they had tryouts, and they needed 5 what I call blocking dummies to play against the 5 freshman basketball players from Indiana and Kentucky that they had brought up. But it was a great experience. I got to travel around, played at UT on their new tartan surface up there, in a freshman game, and played with the first black basketball player in the SEC, and we beat them. He was with Vanderbilt, and we beat Vanderbilt, and some of the other. It was a great time.
Barry Wallace, right?
Yes.
Barry Wallace.
He just passed away.
He did.
This past year.
They're giving him a posthumous Distinguished Alumni Award this year.
Yeah. Well, and there was another guy on that team that played football for the Cowboys, and but he played basketball then, and I can't recall his name either. But we actually beat Vanderbilt, and I think that the game was at Tennessee Tech. And again, mostly I was on the bench. And when I started campaigning for Congress, one of the stops I made was in Cookeville, and I ran into my freshman basketball coach who was selling insurance. And we had a good visit, and we understood that I was there to help get the real good players ready. And but anyway, after that year, my roommate and I both decided we didn't like Tennessee Tech anymore, and he went to UT, a guy named Ronnie Whaley, and then I went to Ole Miss, transferred down there, and joined a fraternity, which was a great experience for me, and to learn some social skills and things. And of course, I thought I was pretty cool at the time, and played intramural basketball, and had a lot of things. I was a Sigma Nu, and I pledged as a sophomore, and I had a good roommate, a guy named Tom Payne, who also was a sophomore. So we roomed together. He became a doctor, Dr. Payne, and of course, you kind of lose track of. But I found another Woody up there, a Woody Sample from Tupelo, and he was my best friend down there, and he was my best friend in the wedding, best man in the wedding, my wedding, but we just had a good time. The Sigma Nus have really, I don't think they do the hazing like they used to. It was, everybody hazed that, before you got to get in the fraternity. That was just part of the rites of passage, I guess. But I personally think it's crazy, and I really would be disappointed if they did that. I tell you what they do, and I can't think of the football name of they were playing Vanderbilt, and there was an Ole Miss player who was hit in such a way that he became incapable of walking, and I should know his name, but he later died years later. But the Sigma Nus have, and this sounds crazy, but they now play a football game honoring him, and they dress out in pads, and they play, and they've raised over, I think, $2 million over some 20 years that they donate to generally unfortunately, some high school player or something who has been major injured, or someone in need. But for the fraternity to do that, and they play to raise that money. They dress out in full pads, helmets, and everything, and go to the football field, and they have referees, and they play a football game against another fraternity, or there on campus, or from another campus. And again, they've raised a whole boatload of money, and to help these, particularly the high school kids who get injured catastrophically. And I really appreciate that. When I was there, I mentioned Roger Wicker. Roger and I became buddies because he was from Pontotoc. And of course, we went to Congress together. And Trent Lott, who was a Sigma Nu, he was the Speaker of the House. And so we had a pretty good contingency of Sigma Nus, and counting others. There were about 5 or 6 others from other colleges. And so we had a little different gathering there every now and then to celebrate that we're all the same fraternity brothers. For me, it was a very positive experience. Maybe not for everybody that goes to college, but it helped me out tremendously, and I enjoyed my fraternity life there.
Were there a lot of people there from Jackson or from Western Tennessee when you were at Ole Miss?
There were a number of people who went to Ole Miss at that time. Now it's kind of balanced out if you're going that direction with Mississippi State, and I really don't understand how anybody could go to Cal College down there, and the rivalry continues. A Vanderbilt, Tennessee type deal down there, and the football team has been, we've had some problems there lately, and I'm not sure we're going to get out of that right quickly, but the fans are very loyal, like all college particularly SEC football fans. I love the SEC, and I love to follow football. And I knew Archie Manning. He was a Sigma Nu, and his his son who went to college there, played football there. He was a Sigma Nu, and that I went down there one time to Rush during Rush to help out when I was in Congress, and Roger was there, and Trent was there, and the Manning was there, and that was the Manning boy being there really helps get those kids at the very end of Rush. I enjoyed my time. I met my dear wife there. She was a freshman cheerleader at Ole Miss, and pretty girl, and she's let me hang around for 47 years now.
Congratulations.
And like I said, she's just got elected to the county commission here in Jackson, Tennessee. So I'm really proud of her.
You'll tell us her name, please.
It's Cindy Bryant, and she is CYNDI, and she loves her politics. She loves her tennis, and our grandchildren. We've got one that goes to a college in Nashville. She's doing photography, and it's out there where the Titans practice. And I can't think of the name of the college. It's a private school, and I know it's a lot of money, but she's there. And then our grandson, whom we raised, is 6'8", and he is just starting to play basketball down at Christian Brothers College. He's got a full scholarship for 5 years. They're going to redshirt him 1 year. He's got to put some muscle on his body, but he is a good basketball player. And unlike his grandfather, he is, as I said, 6'8", and can dribble the ball down the court, which is pretty good for somebody that tall. He doesn't realize what he's got yet still, but we're glad he's in Memphis because we can see him play basketball. Although he's going to be redshirted the first time, so we'll have to wait for that.
Well, I have to back up now, and you'll have to share with us Cindy's full name, please, like her maiden name.
Well, she was a Lemons, Cindy Lemons, Cynthia Ann Lemons, and she's from Tupelo. Her father, fascinating story. Her father had the airplane service there. They had a private plane service and ran the airport. Her grandfather now, his father, Cindy's grandfather, the airport in Tupelo is named after him, the C.D. Lemons. Cindy was a Lemons, as I said, and the airport's named after her grandfather. Interestingly, I knew this was going to happen. The great writer in Oxford,
William Faulkner.
Faulkner. I can't remember his name for some reason, but Cindy's grandfather taught Faulkner's brother how to fly, and this was back in the days where her grandfather was the pioneer in North Mississippi of flying, and Faulkner's brother would fly around and on Sundays and drop leaflets out on, below to the farmers who on their land, and telling them to come out to somebody's farm and they can look at an airplane and then they can be flown up in the air by Faulkner's brother pilot and look down and for a couple of dollars look at their farm and everything, and they'd do a flying around a little bit, and they did that, and Faulkner's brother did, and on one particular day though, one bad sad day, he crashed and was killed with the three farmers he had and this is Faulkner's brother now, not Cindy's grandfather. But Cindy's grandfather was there and took Faulkner's brother's wife, who was pregnant, took her home and called the doctor, and then all this to say that later, as soon as possible, Faulkner got his mother and came over to the Lemon's house and picked up his sister-in-law, who was, you can imagine, hysterical, and she was pregnant at the time, and this little baby in her stomach later wrote this book wherein we discovered all this history there and all the connection there. And it was really, really interesting. And it's inspired us to go down there, to go to Faulkner's house. Both of us had been down there had gone to college there for years in law school, and we had other things on our mind other than Faulkner. So we went down there and saw his house and just really enjoyed it, being connected. Back in those days, Oxford was pretty much country, and they had a nickname for Faulkner, and I can't recall what it is, but it was not particularly favorable. It may come to me at some point in the future here, but you can imagine, as famous as he was, and how rural Oxford was in those days, and how he would be coming in, with the white suit and hat and all those kind of things, and they were there with their blue jeans and things on. And they called him Count No Count, and that was his nickname. So, but I think he laughed all the way to the bank with that.
The time that you spent at Ole Miss undoubtedly had a big influence on you. But tell us what two professors do you remember most fondly from your time at Ole Miss?
Well, I'm not real good on the names anymore. Harry, it was his first name, and it'll come to me. He was history, and he would come in, and this was undergraduate school, and again I was a history major. He would come in and take off his tweed jacket and just throw it down on the ground there, or on the floor, and just go at it talking. He was really a good teacher. And then I had, in law school, my favorite guy was Aaron Condon. He taught torts, and he would talk, and it wasn't, it was kind of just talking, telling jokes and BSing, and for about, I don't know, maybe an hour of class. He'd do that for about 55 minutes, and then the last 5 minutes of class he would teach something real quickly on torts. But he was a great teacher. I liked him, and he was, I think, National Guard connected, and I think may have had an influence on me going into the JAG program after law school. But I had actually, that was the time of the draft, and we all were required back in those days in college to take ROTC, and at least 1, maybe 2 years, and then were mandatory, and then you could go beyond that, and which is what I did, to go the last 2 years also, and you picked up a little money that way, but you also owed the government time in the Army and military. And that was the time of the draft, and I recall sitting in the fraternity house that one night when they were drawing the draft for that time, and my birthday was in the top 10. So I knew I was going to be drafted, and I thought it would be best if I went in as an officer than an infantryman, although I didn't think about it really. The second lieutenant who leads the Army, the soldiers, the enlisted soldiers, is usually the one that gets shot. The lifespan of a second lieutenant in combat is about 16 seconds. But I didn't have my whole brain at that time. But as it ended up, I did go in and serve in the Army, but I went in as a JAG officer, the Army. So I did.
What year was that?
Well, I graduated in 1970 from undergraduate school.
Okay.
And then I'm laughing here about what I did afterwards. It had slowed down somehow. I didn't go in at that time. I had gone to training at Fort Bragg, and I remember distinctly I went over there with a bunch of guys from Ole Miss, and we took a weekend off. They gave us a weekend off to get out of the barracks and everything, and we went over, got a hotel room or two, and relaxed and slept. And that was the weekend of the landing on the moon and Chappaquiddick. And of course, we're just college kids sitting over there on a weekend and not necessarily connecting to all, how significant that was. But it was, I remember that distinctly. And but anyway, that was the college undergraduate and the summer camp for the military. And then I got deferred to go to law school, and went straight through law school, summer. I loaded tires, and all this time I was working for, a guy named, had his name from, I can't remember at this point, but a local lawyer there in Oxford. I worked for him. So I was hustling all the way and getting through. I took a class during summer, graduated in a little bit quicker by going to the summers, both summers, going straight through law school. And then I got married. Don't ask me the time. We got married, and right as I was graduating, I guess, from law school, and then they sent us off. I applied for the JAG Corps and was accepted, and then went over to a fort somewhere out to the east to learn how to wear a uniform and stuff, because a lot of my colleagues in that class of JAG officers they had not been to ROTC.
Now we've covered a lot of ground, and we've got an invisible elephant in the room too. That is this whole time. So you were in college from '66 to '70 as an undergraduate, and there was this background. A couple of times you said it was happening. What was it that was going on from '66 to '70 that was causing all this concern about the draft?
I don't know. I'm not sure. 66 to 67. That was college, I guess, undergraduate, and I majored in history. And
you the big historical event that was going on then, even though you're trying to drag it out of me now, aren't you? Yeah. The Vietnam War was.
Yes.
That's what you all were. That's what made the draft significant during that time.
It did, and I knew I thought I was gonna end up going, but I wanted to go as an officer, and but then they let me. I applied for the JAG Corps, and they let me go to the JAG Corps, and that was a different thing. And we ended up at the University of Virginia, where we were. The JAG School was there in the University of Virginia Law School in those days. It's a separate building now. And so we were up there learning about the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And then we got our assignments there.
Before we launch off onto your assignment, we've been going an hour. You want to take a break?
Okay.
And then we'll come back and talk about your assignments as a military lawyer.
Okay.
We're back now. And the first question is a discrete one. What prompted you to go to law school?
Growing up, I didn't know what a lawyer was until I watched television, and it was a show called The Defenders. E.G. Marshall, and I can't remember the person who played his son, but I think he was later married, I can't remember her, who had all the kids that merged together. And that was a big show too. But anyway, I saw these lawyers on television, and I didn't know a lawyer, and I just decided I liked that. And later on, as I went up through into high school, my senior year, people would ask you, well, what are you going to do when you grow up? And being a lawyer sounded pretty good.
Did you know any lawyers in Jackson growing up?
I did not. My father was injured in an accident in Louisiana, and we used a lawyer. Now, again, I'm probably in the 5th grade at this time, and my mother, I know, used a lawyer to get workers' compensation. He was disabled after that point. He had gotten electrocuted and knocked off a platform at work in Louisiana. And my brother stayed with me a lot, and during that time he was driving, still in high school. I went on several double dates with him, and that was not very interesting. That was not good for me. In any event, I watched Perry Mason later on probably, but when people would ask you, I'd say, well, I think I want to be a lawyer, and I actually did follow through with that.
So you probably knew that before you went to Tennessee Tech and before you went to Ole Miss even.
It probably, and a history major and so forth and those kind of things. And I had a great history teacher in high school, and I sort of seemed to relate those two, being aware of history and being a lawyer.
It's almost a dead giveaway that you're either going to law school or on to get a PhD in history if you major in history at college. That's what I did too.
Well, I remember that they told us you'd be a park ranger or a lawyer. So I thought, well, probably go the lawyer route.
What did you think about where you'd end up at that time? Did you see yourself coming back to Jackson or back to anywhere in Tennessee?
Well, in college, whether it was Tennessee Tech or Ole Miss, I didn't think about that. And I'd mentioned earlier about the draft looming and going through ROTC, those things. Back then, I just decided to go to law school. And I remember taking the LSAT, and I only applied for one law school, and that was Ole Miss. And it was a terrible reason. And that was because Archie Manning was coming back for his senior year. That is true. And I discourage any student of today to go into the same law school that you go to the undergraduate school. You need to go out, either sit out for a while and sort of cut that mentality of not Harry High School, but Harry Junior or Harry College. And you want to be able to focus on the law school. And I went straight through, as I think I've mentioned that. And by that time I was getting married, and we were living in married housing there on campus. And Cindy was working downtown, and ended up working at there's a pharmacy school down there, and she had been working full time over there, and we lived in, again, married housing there in Oxford. And after I graduated, we again were moving toward the JAG program and being accepted there, and going to Virginia to be trained in being a JAG officer. And we ended up, our first assignment was in Huntsville at the Ballistic Missile Defense System Command. And that was, we wanted to be a little further away than that, but we stayed there 2 years and had a great time. Then we transferred.
Did you have to take the bar anywhere as part of that process of becoming an Army lawyer?
No. And at that time, you were Ole Miss was diploma privilege. I've never taken a bar exam.
So you automatically got a Mississippi law license for graduating
Right.
from Ole Miss Law School.
And then later came back to Ole Miss, and by reciprocity was brought in. I mean, to me, it's, I had nothing to do with it either way. But to me, if you can go through law school, I just don't understand the need for a bar exam. Because I've known some people who never could get through the bar, and they spent a lot of money going to law school, and just for whatever reason aren't capable or able. They tighten up or whatever it is. But it just seems to me, if you're, graduate from a law school, but again, I know I'm fighting a losing cause there. But since that time, the Mississippi Law School down in Jackson, which was a night school when I went to Ole Miss, has changed all that, and you don't get the diploma privilege now. I think everybody in Mississippi has to take the bar exam. So
That's interesting. Never taken any bar exam anywhere.
never have.
That has to be fairly unique, I think, doesn't it?
It probably is, but I'm not unhappy about that. I've watched people do that and sweat through that. But anyway, it's yeah.
Tell us a little bit about something I take for granted, but maybe some of the people who are watching this video won't take for granted. What exactly is, you called it JAG or JAG? Explain for folks who haven't had the privilege of being associated with armed forces what that means.
Well, certainly you know what that is. It's Judge Advocate General's Corps. And I think there was a television show on back there, and of course, I think Tom Cruise made a movie about a court martial and those kind of things. But you're a military lawyer, and all the branches have those. I had a dear friend in law school that went to the Naval JAG Corps and trained in Whidbey Island, Washington. I trained in Virginia, there at the University of Virginia. And then they dispersed all us out different places and I was looking for change. We wanted someplace out west or up north, and we got Alabama, a long way from home. But Huntsville was good time to do things there. And I tried my first, I represented my first military client there, along with Claiborne Peoples. And Claiborne will remember this. He was just coming out of being down there. He was going back to Tennessee to practice law. And they had a break-in at the CID, that's Criminal Investigation Division. Those were the police sort of effect in the military. And these guys had been caught with their marijuana, and they were mad, and they broke into the CID evidence room to stole it back. And they got caught, and they needed an extra lawyer. Claiborne was representing one of them, and I was representing the other one. And I think we got them off on stupidity, that defense. But anyway, Claiborne and I, we were followed up. He stayed in the Guard when he went back to Trenton. And we were buddies for a while, going together to after I got out of the active duty. I was in the Guard maybe a year or two. Yeah, but I've kind of lost track of him. Claiborne, he's become a judge around.
Longtime district attorney over in Crockett Gibson, and Haywood counties, and now the circuit judge in that.
But we were just starting. They were leaving, and we were starting. And after, well, actually, I had an interesting there in Huntsville. We were building the missiles, the silos and everything, test firing out in Kwajalein. And they had an EEO issue going, and I went out to Kwajalein. And that is a beautiful place. It's an island out in the Pacific, and it's literally, you can walk across, you can see across the island. And it's a little bit longer, and it was a battle and a half as the Marines were taking it during World War II with the Japanese there. And there was an old Japanese pillbox down at the end, and I was able to walk down there and see it, and it's just fascinating. But they had one JAG officer out there, and I guess he had a conflict, and so I had to go out there. And I think I would have had the opportunity to, if I'd have wanted to be transferred out there, but that was, I said, you would either come back with a divorce or a great marriage, because you do get it off the island, but it's very small, and it's a paradise. It's just beautiful. But that didn't attract me, but I did do what I was supposed to do and came back. And then we were transferred over to Fort Carson, Colorado, which was a lot of court martials. And I tried cases and prosecuted a lot, and then I switched over to the defense side.
So people will understand this. In the military justice system like that, all the lawyers are officers in that branch of the military, right? And some of them belong to the prosecution shop, and some belong to the defense shop, and then
administrative.
We had
different lawyers.
People who did legal aid too. In the Marine Corps, some people did, like writing wills and things like that for people.
And it was great courtroom experience. I just really enjoyed it. I mean, most of the cases weren't just serious, but there was a lot of action, and I enjoyed. You could, if you represented somebody in a defense case, you could ask for a jury and get officers. And when I was defending cases, I always liked to get officers on the jury panel along with the old sergeants, because you had no chance with the sergeants. I mean, they were hang 'em high every time. But I liked the young lieutenants. They were just out of West Point, and they thought they knew everything, and you could get them all tangled up with your closing argument. Not that you would do anything wrong, but you were, you get them, well, think about this a little bit, and they overthought it too much. And a lot of times you'd get an acquittal. And they were generally not guilty. But and that was just a good experience. I enjoyed it. The camaraderie there, everybody, it was a big office there. Everybody had the same number of children. Everybody made the same money being in the military. A lot of camaraderie, getting together after hours, and those were good times. And of course, being in Colorado was not a problem. And afterwards, we were about to get out of the Army. We were thinking about it. I think I'd even flown back to Mississippi, because I was licensed there and had an interview or two. But then we got this call and said, we want to send you to West Point. And they had just had a big confab about a take-home exam, electrical engineering exam, where there had been some collaboration, and there were 20 or 30 people involved in it. And they were having problems. They had a few JAG officers at West Point, teaching, and then they had a little shop where they did legal advice and everything. And they got to thinking, the Congress got a hold of it and had hearings, and they decided that they needed to break that up. It was not right, having JAG officers teach the cadets in the daytime and then represent them at night in boards and hearings and stuff like that. So they decided to split, have a distinct JAG office and a distinct instruction by the lawyers, whatever we were calling. I was in that group when we moved up there, and I taught at West Point for a year or two. But after a while, it got pretty boring, especially during the summers when the cadets were gone. And I was approaching about, I think I was in 6, maybe 8 years. It's funny how you can't remember those things. But I was thinking about getting out, and I had a friend from Mississippi who was looking at the Tom Bigby waterway and being employed as a civilian lawyer with the Army there, and being the one lawyer there. And he backed off, and then I ended up coming home. Cindy's father had a heart attack, and we were thinking about leaving the Army, because I was looking at a potential move to Korea unaccompanied, not with my family, and I didn't want to go to Korea without my wife. I didn't want to go to Korea. But so I went home and interviewed for that job with the Tom Bigby Waterway, because my friend had done something different. And that would have been living in Iuka, Mississippi, which I'd never been to, but it was a challenge. And so I was going to do that. But while I was home by myself, I said, I really want to practice law. I've never really done that in the civilian law. And I walked over to a friend, the one lawyer I knew in Jackson, who I'd gone to high school with. And he said, well, we're not hiring anybody, but this firm across the street, it's Walter Hall, who I ended up with. And but I went over there, and I stood at the doorway. I remember it, just standing there, and I said, you just don't walk in off the door, off the street, and ask for a job. That's not very professional. And I said, well, but I'm down here, and I'm not going to be back. I'm going back to New York. Oh, what the heck. And I opened the door and went in and introduced myself to the secretary, and she asked what I wanted, and I said, well, I'd like to talk to somebody about a job. And I don't think she laughed about it or anything, but anyway, it hooked me up with either David Farmer or Jim Todd. I don't think Hewitt Tomlin was there, and that was the Walter Hall and Tomlin firm. And Mr. Hall and Mr. Walter were still there, but were elderly people. And I talked to one of the lawyers, I forget which one it was, and they said, well, come back, let's talk about that. And as it turned out, they had just let somebody go, either that day or the day before. And that lawyer has moved on to Nashville later. But, and one thing led to another, and they visited. And we'd always said, I'm looking like Cindy's here. She's not here. But we had agreed we'd go to neither Tupelo or Jackson, either house, home. But so they wanted to meet Cindy, the wives did, and she wasn't coming up. And her mother made her come up. And then we went out and ate with everybody, the wives, and I think it kind of clicked. And they shortly after that, we went back to New York, and they had offered me a job, and we took the job and moved to Jackson about 1990. Let's see, 1990, somewhere in there.
Did it present any kind of a problem in that interview process or in getting the job that you didn't have a Tennessee license at that time?
Well, that was discussed, and I had the feeling when somebody takes up they've taken the bar and then they get the results and they passed. I can tell you where I was standing when I got the letter indicating that they were gonna permit me to have reciprocity, and that was in front of the courthouse, the old courthouse here, wherever out that way. And but I had taken the job, and I think I was going to be paid as a clerk or something that had not been brought in, given reciprocity. I don't think I thought very far ahead at that point. But anyway, long story short, got in and just had a wonderful time practicing law with those gentlemen. They've got a good track record on becoming judges. It's just an amazing group of folks. Me aside, they have and as it turned out, they were all Republicans. And people used to say to us or ask, well, how come you guys get all these judgeships? And my thought, well, as far as I know, we're the only Republicans that are out in the public, and when you got a Republican governor, you get the fruits of that. When you got a Democrat governor, they're getting somebody else, giving it to another judge.
Before you get too far away from this, and you're probably going to try to get away from me, but I'm not going to let you.
Yeah.
Do you think it was? Was it Cindy that sealed the deal for you with Walter Paul and Hewitt, or Walter Paul and Tomlin?
Well, absolutely. I mean, she. These are great ladies, and they loved her right off the bat. And in fact, that group. I think there are 4 ladies that eat lunch regularly, and of course, Joanne Tomlin is there, and then Miss Farmer, and Miss Breen, and Cindy. Look, that's more than 4, maybe 5, and they go out regularly and eat lunch together and solve all the world's problems.
Do you think that's different than it would be today? In other words, would that be a common thing to have happen today, to want to meet the spouse before you made a job offer to the?
I would think so. Yeah, I would think. But I definitely think they clicked, and I think just doing that helps keep those ties together. And I was going to say it too. The lawyers need to do that more. They don't. When I came to Jackson, and at that time period, it was still the old practice. You'd go eat lunch together. In Jackson, they would at 2:00, all the coffee drinkers would go down to the cafe there on the square and drink coffee. The bankers would come out, and they would talk. And now I see, kids run into Subway. Young lawyers, they run into Subway to get something to take out and take back to the office. And that camaraderie among people is lacking. And now I tell people that we never sought attorney's fees from anybody, or you just didn't do that, because you're sitting there one day eating lunch next to that person. And nowadays, of course, they oftentimes, and maybe it's needed, but to me, they oftentimes seek attorney's fees just because something, the camaraderie is not there anymore. And you're not eating lunches together. They're trying to build those extra hours over the lunch, and it's kind of more dog eat dog, rather than, it seems to me, we've lost a lot of those professional issues or habits, and just maybe having a bar meeting once a year. I don't think that reestablishes it. But that's just my personal feeling, and I understand there's a lot of pressure to bill hours and to work hard for all kinds of reasons.
So you mentioned that someone talked about how many Republicans there were in your firms, and so how long had you been a Republican at that point?
Well, I'd been
long time?
I'd been in the Army, and I wasn't anything. I voted for Jimmy Carter out in Colorado for president because he was a Southerner, and I didn't. I was in the Army, but you didn't do that, and you didn't tout your politics in the military. You couldn't do it, but I did. I voted for Carter, and he's a good man. I'm not going to comment on. I remember the gas lines in Huntsville, Alabama, where you had to get gas every other day between the odd
and even
numbers.
license plate numbers.
Yeah. I remember that.
I was a little younger than you at that point in time, but we went to we took a trip to California to see my father's sister, and I remember that, the odd even thing. That was quite some thing to remember, wasn't it?
And I remember getting our prisoners back from overseas when President Reagan came in.
The embassy hostages from Iran.
But those gentlemen influenced me, especially Hewitt. I was sitting in the office one day, and he came in with, oh my goodness, this name thing is going to get me. He was mayor of Knoxville.
Victor
Ashe. And Victor was running for
Senate
with Al Gore. And Mrs. Ashe, his mother, came in, and Hewitt introduced her to me and said, you're going to handle his campaign here. And I said, I guess. And I was pondering by that time the right to life, pro-life things really caught me on the Republican side and made me a Republican. I'm definitely a right to life person.
You and I were working for the same thing at opposite ends of the state, but we didn't know each other, and I was only about 12, and I had been impressed into the service of Victor Ashe by my father, so...
Well, the mother was something else. I mean, she would just pop into my office coming down here and say, why aren't you out there working for my son? Well, I'm trying to build some hours. And I'd get up and go. But she was a character.
You think that's the first campaign you worked in?
That was the first campaign, definitely. Yeah.
Had you had any thought of being in politics or being involved in politics before that Ashe campaign?
I think I had, and I don't know what. Well, I was a class officer, in high school, that kind of stuff, and but I was kind of pondering a little bit that. I like to ponder things.
Was your candidate successful in that race?
No, but I got $10 out of it. They had a debate in Jackson, and Gore and Ashe, and right in the middle of the debate, Walter Mondale was the presidential candidate on the Democrat side, and everybody down south was running from Walter Mondale in the Democrat Party. And so right in the middle of the debate, Victor Ashe walks over there in front of Al Gore, and Al's kind of getting stiff. What's he going to do? Is he going to hit me or what? He slaps a $10 bill down on there and says, Al, I'll give you this $10 bill if you'll just say the words Walter Mondale. And everybody just laughed and started laughing and whatever. And then I don't think he never said that, Victor. I mean, he never said the name Walter Mondale. And I don't know what happened, but it kind of concluded. But at the end of the debate, I was walking around, the $10 bill was over there still on the podium. So I just picked it up, and I felt like I'd earned it.
Unclaimed property.
Unclaimed property. Oh, a lot of great stories in the politics of it. And of course, Victor didn't win, but he later became mayor of Knoxville and was appointed as the ambassador to some country over in Europe.
I had forgotten that, and I don't remember what that country was now.
Well, those were
it Poland?
Good years. It may have been Poland, because I have a nephew that was all about the country and the world, and he had run into Victor.
We need to give on the record credit to that to Barry, who's sitting over here and who remembered that it was polling when neither one of us did. So that would have been, if you came home the year, let's see, that would have been about 78. How long were you in private practice then?
78. I ran against John Tanner when Mr. Ed retired, and that was 1982, I believe, 81 or 82. And that was my first defeat. And he, as a result of that defeat, I mean, there were those that felt like I'd, run a good race and behaved myself and didn't make a fool out of myself. And I got a call from, oh my goodness, as he's my, I got a call, I'll say it this way, a call about becoming a United States Attorney, because that's, I became known as an up-and-coming person, I guess, and handled the defeat well, and ran a good race, and so I subsequently became United States Attorney in Memphis, and was there a couple of years. And I inherited the Harold Ford Sr. case. That had been tried to a mistrial, and I inherited that, and we tried it again, picking the jury in Jackson. And the problem was over in Memphis, some issues of the leakage from in the first trial while they were debating the innocence or guilt of the senator. I mean, from the senator. No, the congressman, I should say. And they decided they couldn't get a jury over there that would be, I guess, fair to all the sides. So ultimately, the judge decided to pick the jury over in Jackson here, and then try the case, bust the jury over there, which is what they ultimately did. But what Congressman Ford's lawyers had done had convinced the Justice Department to not do that. And they had instructed me to go over to the trial when they'd opened up that following Monday and say that we didn't want to do that. We wanted to pick a jury from Memphis, totally again from Memphis. And I just told the folks I would not do that, and that I would resign, which is what I did in protest of that. And so it went out that direction. I left the United States Attorney position at that point in protest, and the judge agreed they weren't going to, they were going to keep it, picking the jury in Jackson and trying the case in Memphis. And they did that, and ultimately he was acquitted by basically a Jackson, West Tennessee jury. But I was gone by that time, back practicing at Waldrop Hall.
What was it about the instructions to allow the jury to be picked in Memphis that caused you to take such a firm stand about it?
Well, in the first trial, I wasn't involved in that. That was Hickman Ewing, and the Judge Horton was trying the case, and after it hung, it was disclosed to Judge Horton that the jurors, because of their whatever reason, their kinship or liking Congressman Ford, it was leaking out to the Congressman Ford what the jury was doing, and so eventually it was a hung jury. And when they retried it, they were concerned of that same thing happening in the retrial. So they concluded, let's just go ahead and pick a jury out of Jackson, and then we can bus them over there. And I'm trying to think I think I inherited that situation when I became U.S. Attorney. Hickman Ewing was replaced by me as the United States Attorney. That's just, I was the Bush attorney, and Hickman had been there for years. And, of course, you ought to rotate United States attorneys pretty frequently. It is my view and a view of everybody else. I think that's why you change U.S. attorneys. So I inherited the case as it was, and we were going to pick the jury, as I said, from Jackson. And the Rodney King case had happened right around there, and there were some issues there, some feeling maybe that could happen in Memphis if there wasn't a jury over there. And I think Congressman Ford's lawyers were very good lawyers, and they convinced the Justice Department to go ahead and switch back over and pick the jury over in Memphis. And they agreed. And they called, and me and my first assistant talked to them over there at the building one night, Sunday night. And they said, this is what we want you to do, is go and tell the new judge that you agree with Congressman Ford's lawyers that you pick the jury in Memphis again. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And so I said, I'm going to quit in protest. And they said, well, don't do that. But they kept saying, well, you're going to have to go down there and do it. So they ended up, I said I was going to quit in protest, and did. And then they sent somebody down from Washington that Monday to appear for the Department of Justice and agree to this idea of going back to picking the jury in Memphis. And then whatever happened. He was ultimately acquitted. But the judge, I'll say this, Judge Turner did not allow that. He would not allow the Department of Justice to pick the jury over in Memphis with the prosecutors. He said, we're going to pick the jury in Jackson. So they did, and ultimately Congressman Ford was found not guilty by that Jackson jury. It's kind of confusing, and I didn't explain it as clearly, but that's the result.
Can we take a short break? I'm
Sure.
going to have to. How long were you U.S. Attorney, Judge Bryant?
Oh, it was probably a little over a year, seemed like, I think.
And as between being in private practice and being the U.S. Attorney, how do those two things compare in your mind?
I think being U.S. Attorney, you have tremendous power, and I think you've got a great staff. I think no question Memphis has tremendous lawyers that are AUSAs, Assistant United States Attorneys, and I think Hickman Ewing did a great job in starting. Well, I think maybe even he inherited a good office as well, and it's important that you have people that are proficient in the law, and they also have to be mindful of being fair and a lot of issues that you deal with. And I think we've been really fortunate to, over the years, to have such a good United States attorneys who, again, hire the AUSAs to do the work.
In the time you were there, were you more focused on the criminal part of the job or the civil part of the job?
I think clearly it was the criminal part. Of course, the main justice directs you to do certain things sometimes, and then it was Project Trigger Lock, and I think it's called something different now, but it's where you're picking up felons with guns, felons in possession. And I know now that the United States Attorney focuses on those issues. And that's a very good issue, because people who have been convicted of crimes, having guns, that's the violence right there. And there are communities that have an awful lot of that. And it's not just picking on one group of people. It's just it is out there, and oftentimes there are drugs that accompany that situation, and that's very destructive to a broad community, in my view, and that's something, and it's against the law. If you're a felon and you're in possession of a gun, you know that you can be arrested and tried and convicted for that.
Had you had any real dealings with criminal law when you were in private practice?
I had, back then we didn't have a public defender in Jackson, and we got appointments, and the senior...
That still happens. The public defender has conflicts.
Yeah, well, that's true.
So I can assure you that it still happens.
We would get things handed to us, and also passed on to us. The court gives us some, and then our senior partners would also pass them down to us as well, along with sometimes divorce cases.
What did you mainly do when you were in private practice?
We represented a lot of insurance companies and car accidents and things like that, and just all over West Tennessee.
Did a lot of cases go to trial then?
They did, and we represented the Farm Bureau and a lot of other companies, major insurance companies, and we were very busy all over West Tennessee, and I enjoyed trying those. You had contributory negligence in those days, and I won a lot of cases, but it's a little harder now without contrib.
It's not no off switch anymore, is it?
And I think it's probably more fair as it is now, comparative negligence.
Overall, did you enjoy private practice?
I loved it. I loved to try cases, and I tried them in every county, and I thought I was pretty good. Now, I did not wear bow ties then. Yeah, and there was not anything better than going into a small town, a little snotty-nosed lawyer from Jackson with a bow tie on. You're just asking for trouble. And so I had a brown suit I wore to trial. And
times must have changed a little bit. One of my partners was going to try a case the other day, and he had on a bow tie, and I said, do not go down there. He was going to Lauderdale County. I told him, do not go down there and try that case with that bow tie on. He's an Ole Miss man, too.
Yeah.
Must be something in the water down there.
But that's good advice, though, because I'm telling you, you don't do that as a young lawyer.
Well, he told me that one of the jurors stopped him after the trial as they were leaving and said he liked the bow tie. Yeah. So maybe times have changed.
Well, you have insurance written over your forehead.
It sounds like, frankly, a pretty courageous thing to do, to leave a job where you had all that responsibility as the U.S. Attorney over a matter of principle. Did you have a plan or for what you would do next?
Well, I did not anticipate that, but it was something I felt like I needed to do. I mean, the community at that time that was very controversial, with Congressman Ford. He and I later worked together in Congress, and got to know each other, and certainly we had different opinions on things, but it was an interesting relationship, having prosecuted him at that time, and but I do feel like we did the right thing, because he, a congressman is no better than the average Joe. If we had felt like he'd already been charged before I got there, so I didn't make that decision. But there was obviously some folks that believe he had violated the law and he should be tried. And just because he was a congressman does not shield him from liability. And so I was just carrying on what my predecessor, Hickman Ewing, had begun. And I was concerned about the case, the trial, and so forth. And as I said, the Congressman Ford had some really good lawyers, and they were able to convince the people in Washington that their way was a better way to pick the jury. And the judge didn't agree with that, by the way, and he started the trial that day. And I think Congressman Ford had a heart flare at that time, and they had to take him to the hospital. And the case did not start that day, but a day or two shortly thereafter. And ultimately, though, he was acquitted by a Jackson jury.
After you left, where did you go? Where'd you end up?
I ended up. They had a back door for me at Waldropin Hall. I just kind of came and go and went and here and there. I don't think I had a key, but I counted that. I was in and out of there probably 3 times, and of course, there were different lawyers over the period of time as people became judges and others came in.
How long did you stay that second time that you went there to Waldropin Hall?
I'll have to think about that a little bit. It was, I have to. It was a few. I think it was a pretty good while back trying cases again. But I left one more time to go run for office, or maybe twice, and they got used to me sticking my head in the door. So.
I think that was in '94 then when you ran for Congress the first time, or excuse me, when you ran for Congress the second time and prevailed.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to run for Congress for U.S. Representative in 1994 versus some other office?
Well, I had that's where I was, and I felt like I needed to. I mean, I had something to offer, and it was a crazy thing, but politics make you do crazy things. And if I look back, and I probably wouldn't have done some of the things I did, and but you just when I ran against John Tanner, that was the first one in 1988, and that was really an eye-opener for me. There were 3 other defendants in that race. The defendants.
That's a good way that's a good way to describe people who.
We were talking about U.S. attorneys, but anyway, there were 3 other Democrats other than John Tanner, and then there were 2 other Republicans than me. So at election day, I surprisingly won. I beat the Republican he was a young Republican chairman nationally, and big Republican in Memphis and everything. And but I beat him and one other guy. And then John beat Mayor Conger here, Ivy Scarborough, and other people that were in that race, the Democrat side. But the point I want to make is, as I counted up the votes in that election, if you took every vote that John Tanner did not get in 1988, he still would have won. In other words, he had more votes to beat everybody else in the election on both sides votes, which gave me a clue that I was in trouble and I had nowhere to go. Of all the votes cast in that, his votes beat everybody else's votes, Republican and Democrat. So I took a big gulp and got into it. And as I said, apparently ran a respectable campaign. Cindy, I was trying to remember what it was, but she campaigned and she had a recipe of oatmeal or something, oatmeal cookies or something that would help your system. And I remember her telling me she went into a men's store and she was new to campaigning and offered him, it was a muffin, one of those that can help your system. And she said, "You look like you need a muffin," and offered him one. And I think we may have lost that vote. I don't know. But we all learned, and it was good times.
What was your most memorable moment in the '94 campaign? The one in which
the '94, the winning was great for a change. That was good, but it was. I think clearly we had our party over in Memphis because I had Germantown, Collierville, and Cordova, all the Republican part of Shelby County, and that was my stronghold. And we had our party there at a hotel there. It's been renamed several times. So when you go in, it's right there on the left. And that was, my mother was able to be there, and she would have been up in the like 90s or high 80s. And I've got a great picture of her and me and Cindy, kind of celebrating at the time that we learned that we had won the race. That was a hard race. I had a number of opponents. There were probably 10 Republicans in that primary, and that winning the primary was in essence winning the election at that time, although I did have opposition in the other party. But that moment with my mother, and she had worked so hard for me, and I know she was proud of that effort.
What about once you got to Washington? What was the day-to-day routine like for a congressman in 90?
Well, you kind of go around and meet with people. You're always you're in committees, and a lot of times you get called out of these committees to go visit some kids that have come in from your district, and you get up and you have to go out, and you're always kind of moving around, seeing people and doing things, getting your picture made with folks. And the good times are a lot later. When we had a gym there, and we'd play basketball, and get to know Republicans and Democrats, and then we played the baseball game. I played in that baseball game. I would have been right in the middle of that shooting had I been up there this year, because that was great fun of getting up in the morning and going over there and practice and do all those things. I used to tell Cindy, I didn't do it too often, but I would say, you wore a pin, and the security folks and all the folks knew who you were when you wore the pin, but after a while they knew you, and I would not wear them often because I just didn't care to wear them. If they knew me, I'd do that. And I'd tell Cindy that, anytime I get real down up there by myself, I'll wear my pin, because when you walk down the hall, all the cute little girls talk to you, smile at you. And if I don't have it on, they don't even look at you because it's some old guy. But that didn't work but about one time with her. But it was it's a good experience because you see people coming up all the time. I was there at 9/11, and the world changed obviously, but Washington changed tremendously, and we were out there, and you could I saw that first accident, that first crash in my office, and then when I saw that second one, I said, this is not good. And they called and said, get out of your offices right now, right? And I think there was a plane coming to the Capitol, and it didn't get there. And I think that may have been the Pennsylvania crash.
Where was your office at that time? Longworth?
No, Longworth was the first year. I'd moved into the Cannon. And I was upstairs on the 4th floor. And so we got out and went over. I was living in a house just right down the street. And it was called the C Street, and it's a religious group, and the guys and we lived there, and I think there were three Democrats and about 5 Republicans that lived in the house, and it was owned by a Christian group that works there in Washington, and they raise private money, and they go around and meet members and propagate the word of Christ. And it was a good time together to have the Republicans, these Republicans and Democrats together. Steve Largent was there, Tom Coburn was there, Zach Wamp was there, I was there, and then there were 3 Democrats that lived there.
I remember Steve Largent as a football player for the Seattle Seahawks. I didn't realize he was in Congress.
Yeah.
Were you all there for many years together?
Yeah. He was our pitcher on the baseball game. He's a good athlete. And when we played that game, against the Democrats.
That doesn't seem quite fair to the other people for a former professional athlete.
Yeah. Well, Jim Bunning was there at one time. And he was a professional pitcher.
Was he a congressman?
Yeah.
He's a federal district judge in eastern Kentucky now? Is that
That's
right?
his son.
That's his son.
Yeah. And Bunning was, he had thrown his arm out by then, and I think he got hit pretty hard in the ball game by the Dems. I wasn't up there then. And then Vinegar Ben Mizell was an old congressman, and he had pitched batting practice. He was a pro baseball player. He's from Vinegar Bend, Alabama, and he had served in Congress from one of the coast, I think South Carolina or one of those places, and he was an old guy, but he could still hum that ball. And Vinegar Ben Mizell.
Did you ever have did your family ever go to Washington with you? Is what I'm trying to say. Or did they stay here in Jackson?
They stayed in Jackson, and they came up a couple of times, for inaugurations and things. Cindy would come up rarely. I did not stay in Washington over the weekend probably more than 10 times, and I was there 8 years. Everybody, I did. I went home all the time, and we had town meetings and going all around doing stuff all the time. With a 2-year term, you have to hustle all the time. And of course, senators have longer periods of time, but they have a reason.
Did you fly always, or you came home for the weekend?
Actually, I came to your parents' house once or twice and spent the night and rode up with your dad, and it was just a joy to be with. I mean, he told me some stories and all those things. They weren't nasty or dirty or anything like that, but they were just good, funny stories. And
he is one of the finest storytellers.
Yeah.
Around, even though I'm probably not neutral.
Yeah.
What about travel? Was there much travel involved in your duties as a congressman? Did you have to go overseas any or travel around the country?
Well, there were always trips you could do. We did a couple of them. We went to, this was some organization, I can't remember what it was, that we went to France, and that was a last minute deal. And we were able to go down and see where the D-Day occurred, and got a great view of that. And we got some flag poles that were in the cemetery, that the flags had worn out, and the small flags, that honor our Americans there. And we got some of those. We travel. I went to Haiti one time with the 101st, with the guy. He's on Fox News all the time. I can't think. He was the commanding general then, and he's a great man. He's got a real future in not just television, but somewhere. I mean, he's a really smart man in the military, and we went down to Haiti, and I think we spent maybe one full night, and it was like a week. It's a horrible place. and the horrible conditions. You know, they don't make the baseballs down there anymore like they used to, and it's back then the 101st Airborne Division. They were providing the police support. We were being driven along, and every time we stopped in traffic, the MPs, the soldiers, would stand out and block the doors to our car. And Ed Whitfield had the Kentucky side of Fort Campbell, and I had the Tennessee, and that's the two of us went down there with the commanding general.
How big was your district in those days?
It was big. You know, we had Memphis to
You
Clarksville.
talked about it starting at the edge of Shelby County.
County.
Where was the other eastern end of it?
Well, it would have been past Nashville, and I'm trying to think of some towns around there, but it would have gone over there. But we
Did
had
it include part of Williamson County?
Williams.
Part of Williamson County?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
all the way up north to
Clarksville.
and
Yeah.
that's Montgomery County.
Montgomery
right?
County. Yeah.
It's
And now it's been changed 2 or 3 times. Every 10 years it changes.
Did you have to do a lot of travel around that huge district when you were?
We did, yes. Yeah, we did. We were real good about, traveling and talking to people and seeing people, having town meetings. It's probably different now. There's more hostility and actual danger, probably. I had one guy that I was a little afraid of, and he would come to town meetings, and I'd have to call the sheriff, and he had some real issues. But he was the only one that I had. But nowadays, you just don't know.
Other than that bad experience, what was your interaction like with your constituents in those days when you were traveling around the district?
Well, they like that. I mean, they like to see people and talk to them, their members, and I think we did a good job of that. We did, and I think there are a lot of people that I still, when I travel around, and I don't do that much anymore, but I see some people. They do remember, and we really made an effort to try to get out there and talk to people and be seen, and I thought did a pretty good job of that.
What do you think was your most memorable experience as the congressman from the 8th district? Oh, excuse me, 7th, right? Sorry.
Yeah, 7. Oh, there were a lot of good times, and but I probably the impeachment was not, but that was
That's the one I want to ask you about, but we'll get to that next. I had a secret motive for asking that question.
I think the best thing I did, and really, and it's a small thing, but up in Clarksville, they had a tornado, but it tied in with the impeachment actually. But they had a situation up there in Clarksville where they had a lot of people who worked in Kentucky, Fort Campbell, because Fort Campbell straddles Kentucky and Tennessee. And the Tennesseans who worked over there, like the firemen and the school teachers that went over there and stayed on Fort Campbell, but they were in Kentucky, had to pay income tax. Kentucky was taking income tax, and ordinarily in that situation, as you know, you'd get an offset, but because Tennessee did not have a tax, they didn't get the offset. And so that was the first big thing they wanted to do is change that. And ultimately we got that changed where they didn't have to pay Kentucky tax, state tax on that. And that was the first thing I heard when I became congressman about you got to do something about that. And we got it done. So that was that. And then the impeachment trial, of course, was... You
were on Judiciary and Commerce committees.
Commerce. And I was on the Ag Committee, but then I got on the Commerce Committee and then the Judiciary Committee. And in that last capacity there, we had the impeachment trial, and I was involved.
It might seem self-evident to you, but and since there have only been a couple of major impeachment trials in the history of the country, maybe to everybody else, but who,
Yeah.
whose impeachment trial?
Oh, yeah, the impeachment of
President Clinton.
President Clinton. Oh, okay, I knew that one somewhere. But I took the deposition. It was a moving target, what we were doing, and the Senate was changing things all the time because they didn't like necessarily what we were doing. And of course, Trent Lott was the head of the Senate, and he was a fraternity brother of mine, and as Wicker was too. And we, the House managers, there were about 10 of us, counting Henry Hyde, the Judiciary Committee. We prosecuted the case, and there were 3 guys Henry Hyde designated to put the case together. I was one of them, and Jim Rogan in California, and my friend who's governor of Arkansas was the other one, and Bill McCullough. There were 4 of us, and we divided up, and they said, well, they kept changing the rules on us, the senators did, and but ended up with, we could take 3 depositions. There was going to be no live testimony on the Senate floor. They weren't going to let Monica go be cross-examined on the Senate floor. And we took the 3 depositions. I took her deposition. Jim Rogan was with me. And he told me halfway through that her lawyer was kicking her under the table, signaling to her. This is a professional, big-time Washington lawyer, cheating in a deposition. But I was criticized somewhat about being kind to her. And I just think nowadays, the Me Too movement, nobody was thinking about those kind of things. But I think just being from the South and being just more kind, I guess, I probably didn't hammer her, but I wasn't going to get anything out of her anyway. I mean, she wasn't going to confess to killing anybody or thing, and I felt like I treated her with respect because she was a victim. And laughingly, there were people that could argue that the Republicans were responsible for this because this was during when she first met him was during a government shutdown, and she would never have gotten back there with him alone like that had they been the regular staff in there. They just had a bunch of volunteers and things like that, and somehow she was able to just. They had pizza. They ordered pizza, and she just got a pizza and took it back there to him. And then they actually had some involvement at that point. But she would never have gotten out there had they had the regular staff there. She wouldn't have gotten anywhere near him.
Were you involved in the deliberations of the House Judiciary Committee in deciding to bring the impeachment charges?
Oh yeah, we did that. And
what was that process like?
Well, we just met as a Judiciary Committee, and we had the Starr report and all those things, which were pretty dramatic. And Newt was the Speaker of the House, and they were pushing for the impeachment, and we voted for the.
What was the driving reason behind that? Do you think
Well, I think everything that's done in Washington has some political overtone to it, and I'm sure that was a piece of that. But I like to think that we felt like that he had done what he had done, and that was an impeachable offense. And in terms of
as one of the managers, were you actually on the floor of the Senate day to day, acting as a sort of a prosecutor in the impeachment trial?
It was. I was. We were sitting on the left-hand side, and by custom, that's where the impeachment managers sit. And it was usually it was the wrong side. That was the Democrat side ordinarily. And we're sitting there thinking, what is the custom? Where in the world we've had one impeachment, and this is a custom. And we sat right in front of the Democrats. Like Schumer was right behind us, and some others. And I remember, and I tell this story a lot about the old senator from South Carolina, Strom Thurmond, who was he loved women, and the president never did show up on the floor, but his lawyers were we were has-been lawyers, and the president had real lawyers, and they had a couple of really real attractive women there on their lawyers, and they would be down there, and I would chuckle, and Senator Thurmond was sitting in the front row because they sit in order of seniority, and so he was right on the front row. And he'd be down there, and he'd lure those two girls, those really pretty girls over there. And he was always saying, the way you live a long way is you eat bananas and you do push-ups. And I think he was over the push-up by that time. But he would lure them over there and hand them bananas, and he'd get their hands, and then he would just hold on to them, and he'd be kind of sitting there hunched over, kind of bent over, because he's 100 years old just about. He's not, his body's kind of changing. But you can tell those ladies were trying to get away, but wanted to be kind to him, and I had that, and that was about every day. He would get them over there and talk to them, and but it was a fascinating time, historic.
What do you think overall of the process? Was it a I mean, in retrospect, do you think it was a worthwhile endeavor?
I don't know. It's I think ultimately he was sanctioned by the Bar Association. He was sanctioned by a judge, a federal judge over there, who was a student of him in law school, and she, that was sort of not what we did, but it was, having to do with other dealings that some of the other ladies had filed lawsuits on, and he was sanctioned as well by the Bar Association, I think, and not. I think he was lost his license for a time, although he never used them anyway. But overall, it was the second second impeachment, and it was what it was. The Senate did not vote to convict him of either of the charges, and I think probably I had an idea that, and maybe some others did, that was going to be the situation. But you're out there, and we finished what we started.
If there were, you said there weren't any live witnesses in this in this trial. What do you think what happened day to day in the impeachment trial?
Mm-hmm. Well, we just argued things, and
was the Chief Justice presiding over the impeachment trial?
The Chief Justice was there, and I saw him laugh one time. He just sat there otherwise, and Lindsey Graham, I'll never forget that. Lindsey was talking in that South Carolina. I love Lindsey, and he was raised. His parents had a bar, and they were killed in a car wreck, and he raised his sister. And I don't think she's a lawyer, but he's a good man. But anyway, Lindsey got up there, was talking, and said, and he had that deep South Carolina thing, which I think he exaggerated. He said, "You know what now? Back in where I come from, if you're out past 2 o'clock, you up to no good." And I looked up at the Chief Justice, and he actually broke into a little laugh. Otherwise, he just sat there and didn't do anything, didn't rule on anything. What do you rule on there? I mean, this is history here, and there's not much precedent there. but it was a interesting.
Did you ever think about Andrew Johnson while that process was going on?
I did. I thought of the Tennessee connection here. We got Tennessee people involved in this one too, in a different role, of course.
Was the trial long?
It seemed like it was 2 or 3 days. It was a strange time because the press was all over, and I had my Princess Di moments. When you'd walk out of the hotel, when we met with her privately, and we came out, it was just like 1 million people out there. It seemed like, and people flashing, lights flashing and stuff, and you just, I didn't have a lot of publicity and stuff while I was up there, and this one brought, certainly the limelight there. And but I felt like I did the right thing with her, and I don't think anybody on our side felt like the Senate was going to impeach him. I mean, there were too many Democrats on it, and we had a lot of Republicans that voted against the charges, the 2 charges.
What about impeachment as a constitutional institution? Do you think it's good for the Republic to have that option if it's needed?
Well, we've used it twice, and I know it's, if you watch television, they seem to say that's a possibility right now, and I think it needs to be very, very strong, something really, really, really bad to upend the country like it will do, and it did, and we don't. I don't know from what I see. I wasn't around with the first one, but I sort of understood through my history that he sort of got maybe he wasn't that bad to impeach, but I'm not so sure about the Clinton. It's in retrospect, I don't know. We did what we did, and you got down that road, and you couldn't. What could you do? You couldn't sanction him, and you couldn't reprimand him. I mean, those kind of things came up. Can you do that? And something short of the impeachment. I don't know.
Other than the impeachment trial, what are some memorable things that you participated in while you were in Congress?
Certainly the 9/11, just being up there and reacting and seeing what was happening, and that was certainly historic. I enjoyed the Ag Committee, and interestingly, there was a little redheaded girl on that committee, and she ended up marrying Newt Gingrich. I said, I remember that girl. She was, and now she's over at the Vatican, and as the ambassador there. And but Newt and the meeting. Newt was a great leader, and I wish there would be some way where they would vote him in to be chair at this point. And he could do that. I mean, you don't have to be a member of the Congress to lead be the Speaker of the House, is what I'm trying to say. And he was an idea man, and I really appreciate what he did, and as our leader.
What made you decide to move on from your U.S. representative seat to other endeavors?
I had decided I was not going to stay any more than 10 years. And then when Fred rather quickly had a tragedy in his family, and I think it just pulled him down. Fred Thompson. And okay. I'm sorry, I'm talking like Fred.
It's all right.
He's a good man, and he's a senator, was a senator. And when that opportunity came up, it came up quickly, and I thought, well, gosh, it'd be nice to go to the Senate, and you'd have a lot of authority to do things and do a lot of things, more so. And that's ultimately why you go up there. I mean, you don't go up there to be seen or to check off the box or something like that. You know, ideally, people go up there to do good things, and certainly as a senator, you can do more. You have more authority than you do in the House, simply because the numbers are different there.
Plus, you don't have to run every 2 years, too.
Yeah, and so I jumped in it, and then Lamar got in it, and that was pretty much it.
And after that race, what did you decide to do?
Well, I think I have to think about these things. I went to work for Baker Donaldson, and I had an office in Washington and in Nashville, and enjoyed that. But that some people are lobbyists, and some people aren't, and I was not. You know, I liked doing things. I didn't like asking people to do things, and that environment that was in Washington. And it's pretty hard work because you've got a lot of competition trying to get clients and so forth. And I ended up going to Walterpen Hall at that time, going back to practice.
Now for the third time, right? Back to private practice at Walterpen Hall.
Yeah. And that was the last time I left. I mean, I left after that. I didn't go back there. And I enjoyed not traveling. After 9/11, it really changed up there, and it's as you all know, flying is much more onerous than before. We used to run through airports and jump on a plane at the last minute. They'd open a door sometimes for you, let you get in. And now that you get shot if you're running down through a thing, it's dangerous. And it's just I don't even like to fly anymore. And it's a lonesome life up there. It really is. At night, if you don't, pardon me, if you don't chase women and drink, it's pretty lonesome. And like I said, I was in a Bible study and lived in a house with people who were sort of committed not to doing those things, although some things did happen. But and you're away from your family a lot, and even when you go home, you're out traveling about the district. But the Senate would have been, I think, had I won the Senate, I think I probably would have moved the family up there because you got a longer time to settle.
Okay. Well, how about we take a short break?
Okay, good.
We've got you back in private practice now, Judge Bryant, at Walterpen Halls for what we count as the third time here. And what was your private practice like that third time compared to the first two times? Did you try a lot of cases? Did you have a lot of day-to-day appearances in court? Was it the same or different?
Well, the last time I was there at Walterpen Hall, it was maybe a little bit more, and I don't mean to demean anything, a little more sophisticated, handling things that produce more money and more commercial type practice, which does that. And had a couple of very good plaintiff's cases, which I did not usually take. And so I left, I think, a pretty good signature there in terms of money. And when I did leave to become a magistrate judge, I didn't take any of that stuff, of course, because I can't practice law. And I left that.
How long were you in private practice that third time with Walterman Hall?
I think it was a couple of years, and long enough to really start worrying again about missing deadlines and was that the statute of limitations and this and that. But it's they were really good to me, and I think they've gone different directions now. Several different firms have come out of that firm, and I certainly am somewhat disappointed that it's not any of my business because I've been out of that practice. But I'm sad about how the Walterman Hall firm ended in effect. Now, actually, they are still present in a much smaller version, and they would take issue with it. And when I'm speaking, I'm talking about the bigger firm where you had numbers of people there, and whereas it's not there now. It's I think I know the people there, and they're good people working hard, and very, very competent lawyers.
Well, what made you decide you wanted to be a judge after all this time of being a lawyer in private practice and then a politician and two more runs at political office? What made you think, well, it's time to be a judge?
Well, it settles you down for sure. You're limited in politicking. You're not supposed to do any of that, and you have to. Obviously, when you put the black robe on and you're known as a judge, I've always been aware of what I do and how I do it and those kind of things. But even more, you're careful about what you do, and you're representing an awful lot as a judge. And but I had the opportunity more than anything happened. These positions don't become available, and I was in Walter as we've established, working, and the opportunity came up to have a vacancy for this magistrate judge, and so I jumped right in, and knowing the people over there, that Judge Todd and Judge Breen and Judge Anderson, I knew that would be just a really good environment and wonderful people to work with, and it is. Everybody that works there in that building is very professional, and I was excited and honored to be able to be the magistrate judge that long.
How does that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but before we go any further, how does that come about? How do you get to be the magistrate judge?
There has to be an opening, which there is now, and there is a lengthy process of going through committees that are established, committees composed of lawyers, citizens, that there's advertising, and then they do the committees, interview people, and kind of weed through some people there, and they're narrowing this, and there are a couple of other hearings. I haven't really been involved other than to go into the one where I was selected one time and be interviewed. But there's all these hoops and steps, and once you get picked by this panel, and there's again a couple of panels that do this, you have to have a background check by the FBI, and they go through and go talk to your neighbors and stuff, and eventually it probably takes a half a year at the slowest to go through that process.
Well, how do you compare the daily activity as a congressperson to the daily activity as a magistrate judge? Can you tell us how you would characterize the difference or the similarity between those two things?
Jokingly, let me say this jokingly, I said that when I had the opportunity to do the magistrate judge. I said, "You mean I don't have to go out and speak every Saturday night? I don't have to ask people for hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and I don't have to say nice things about I don't like people I don't like. I can do that. Throw me in that patch." But that's humorous there. But it's a real opportunity, and it's a great group of people to work with. It's very professional, and it's just a climate over there that is first class, and I've enjoyed those years.
What do you do on a day-to-day basis as a magistrate judge?
Well, it's you think you've got your day scheduled, and but then you have all these things like the agents, various agents coming in that need some kind of warrant, search warrant, and any other things that you have to deal with, and then you have to. I do drug court, which is working with people who are on probation, and they're having some issues, and we have set up a court here to help them straighten out and before they have to go sentenced to go back to prison, and we call it a drug court, and I manage that. That's a couple of times a month. We bring people in and talk to them and see if we can't help them out, and of course, you've got I've mentioned the agents, various agents coming in with warrants that have to be signed. We've got all kinds of filings that we have to deal with, both civil and criminal filings. And then I have to go to the bench and hear matters. I have jurisdiction up to a year in prison. And so that's not sentencing for a great deal, a long time, and rarely do we do that. The Article 3 judges have the sentencing powers, the big ones. But we also do detention hearings and different discovery matters and civil cases. It's just a number of things that have been heretofore handled by the Article 3 judges, the district judges, and what Congress tried to do when they created the magistrate judges was to take some of that workload off them and handle other issues that and free the Article 3 judges, who are the district judges, to handle their caseloads, and they're overwhelmed. The Article 3 judges are, and we have scheduling conferences and meetings and do some mediation, all those different things, just to try to take that load, ease that load for the Article 3 judges.
So it sounds like maybe you hear some misdemeanor cases. Is that right?
We do.
You have jurisdiction over the misdemeanor cases, and do you deal with people's bail and pretrial detention and things like that?
That's a significant part of being on the bench, is hearings on setting bonds or locking them up pending their trial.
Do you find that it's difficult? Does it bother you when you have to lock somebody up as you call them?
I'm only doing it usually for a short time. I think about the district judges who sentence people for long periods of time. But what I do here is, and I don't mean to belittle anybody, they oftentimes come in and they want to get a bond because all of these, it's a litany of problems that they have. And I just wonder sometimes if before they do what they do that causes them to be locked up, if they ever thought, well, maybe if I got caught, all these bad things would happen. All the problems at home and things that I do here after they get caught. And again, it's hard, but I guess you get kind of used to it because you realize the ultimate goal there is to protect society from them if they're a dangerous person or if they're likely not to come back. Your obligation is, if you believe that they're a dangerous person or they're not going to come back, then it's your duty to lock them up, you know, and keep them there in spite of all the terrible stories you hear about how difficult it is, unless they get released. So you have to get a little hardened sometimes and just realize that you're there to do to protect society.
Well, let's finish up with a couple of things that are happier thoughts than that one, and those are: have you got any parting words of wisdom for young lawyers that might guide them along in their initial path as a lawyer?
Well, I've not been encouraging always to people, flamboyantly encouraging to people to go to law school. I think it's a tough road to go today, and I think more so than when I started law school many years ago. I think you've really got to be committed and want to do this, because you're getting into an arena that is very expensive to go to law school, and once you get out, I think finding jobs is a little more difficult this day and age, and for any number of reasons that I won't go into. And it's just I would not do that unless you really have a heart for the law, and before you take on all that debt and so forth. Because I think one of the biggest issues we've had to deal with is, and I'm going against the tide here, is the advertising. I think that's one of the toughest things out there, where that has changed since I started practicing, and I think the effects of that overall have not been in the best interest. But I'm a weak, small voice calling out in the woods about that. I think it's here to stay.
It seems like that at this point. You think overall that's been a negative influence on the practice of law?
Well, it hurts young lawyers who need to cut their teeth on cases like who ran the red light, who bumped into the back of you, rear-ended you, those kind of things. And now it's just gobbled up, scooped up by folks who have big advertising budgets. And I think they do good jobs, certainly, but that's changed a lot, and I'm not sure it's for the good. But it's here to stay.
You think young lawyers should try more cases to get earlier in their careers?
Well, I think it's good experience, but you don't have the opportunity now, because they get settled very quickly. The insurance companies know when they can settle cases, and there's a positive thing there. I guess I'm a lone voice in the woods there on that, but it's. I just encourage people that are going to law school to be sure they want to do that, and strive to do the best they can once they get there, because it is very competitive.
Well, now something even better than that. So you mentioned your grandson, the one who's 6'8", who's the basketball player. How many grandchildren have you got?
We have 4 grandchildren, and one is in Nashville, and 2 are in Mississippi, and this one, the tall one, is in Memphis now, and he's going to hopefully be a basketball star. He's good. They're good kids. All of them are good kids, and they're worth having to put up with their parents.
Can I excerpt that part and
Yeah.
and send it to your children?
And
The
we've like any family, we have our ups and downs and things. It's a lot of challenges out there in this society that we live in.
what about what are the ages of your grandchildren?
Uh, they're let's see, they're around the two girls. The little girls are about 10 and 8, I think, and I know I'm getting that wrong, maybe a tad older. And
Are they in Mississippi?
they're in Mississippi, and then my granddaughter in Nashville is in her second year of college, and my grandson has just graduated from high school. So
Starting at Christian Brothers this fall,
starting there,
and he's going to be redshirted
and
this year.
He's going to be redshirted, and he's got a great coach down there. I'm really impressed with the coach down there. Super.
Does he routinely tell people that all of his basketball talent came directly from his grandfather?
No, but he's going to pretty soon. I tell him that if I had his height and skills, I would have played pro ball. I loved basketball, and I was okay, but I was not great or anything. But I loved basketball.
What are you? What? Well, I was going to ask you what you're reading right now, but I want to ask you one other question first because I know something that maybe some people don't know. Tell us about the book that you've written or the manuscript that you've got, even if it's not published yet, because I think that's a neat project that you've undertaken about the members of the Madison County Bar.
Well, I don't read much anymore. My wife is a voracious reader, and she is just really good at. But I read at work and stuff, and I try to do physical stuff, and she encourages me to read books. I do read the Bible, and I'm in a couple of men's groups. I got a great Sunday school class at Inglewood Church here, and that kind of connections, I enjoy that. And your other question was my book. My book. It's so fat I can't afford to pay to print it, publicize it.
Tell us what it is.
But it's a compilation of every lawyer that's ever practiced law in Jackson that I can find, and I've got a huge list, beginning at the very beginning of the first lawyers over here, and going through all these things. And it's a great history of the legal community here. And unfortunately, there were times when it was really not the best in behavior. And I joke about this. I have to maybe wait for a few people to die before I can publish it because I might get beat up. I don't know. No, it's
how many are you up to now?
I hadn't counted, but it's several hundreds. I mean, it's hundreds. And it's really, there's some neat stories of people and funny stories about things. And I just have enjoyed it. The library here in Jackson is a wonderful library. The Tennessee Room portion of it's got great information in there and things. I've found this wonderful lady, and I think I've lost her. It's an African American lady, and there's the issue of who was the first black attorney in Jackson, and I've kind of dug in and gotten in that a little touchy area there with some folks, but who I think there's a dispute there on that, and this lady she was the secretary to this African American attorney, and I found her, and I went to her house, and I told her who I was. I was a judge, and she let me in, and we talked about it. And she talked about her boss. Of course, he's long dead, passed away, and she has all these wonderful papers that established things about who was where, when. And I said, can I, and I told her I was a judge and everything, and I said, can I borrow these, and I'm going to go up to my office and copy these. I mean, these are documents that we need to save those. And she thought a minute, and she said, okay, but I'm going to count the documents. And I said, well, yes, ma'am. And I took them and copied them, and I went back and gave them to her, and I said, now let's count these now. And she looked at me and she said, oh, I think you're okay. So, but I love that. I mean, I'm a judge, and she's going to make it count. I'm not going to take any of those documents, but she has some information that is really good. And I wanted to get her on TV and get her recorded, and she didn't look right, and she didn't want to. She's been real sick, and I think I've kind of lost track of her now. I've been there, and I'm not so sure she's in good condition. But what a voice in history of the lawyers here in Jackson. She has seen everything here, the civil rights movement, and all the different things that went on in the different places. It's a fascinating lady, and I've got some of that information saved, at least. But I like that kind of stuff.
There's a little more poignant story that you shared with me because of you and I have talked a lot in the past about Judge Hugh Anderson and his service at the Nuremberg trials.
Yeah. And
there's a more poignant story that you shared with me, which I think, even though it's a sad story, it deserves to be put down for the record. And I wonder if you might, in closing, share that story with us about Judge Anderson and the rescue attempt with the young man who worked so hard in that effort.
Well, of course, this was as you're writing, and your writing is scholarly. Mine is like a soap opera. And the Nuremberg trial, that we had a judge, Hugh Anderson, here, and I'd found his painting, big painting, down at the courthouse, at the Supreme Court building, kind of tucked away a little bit, I thought. And long story short, there we just were able to get the owner of that, which is the Tennessee government, to loan it to the county courthouse here in Jackson. And we put it up, and it's up there, and we notified his family as we could find him. We had a little ceremony there, and the issue that you're talking about is that Judge Anderson was one of the Nuremberg trials, and afterwards he came back and was a judge in our courthouse where his portrait now hangs. But he came in one morning and somehow opened the elevator and stepped in it and fell one floor to the basement of the Jackson-Madison County Courthouse and was injured. And I know this he's not a young man anymore, but he was a young student in a grammar school. His father was the custodian, and he went and took his son out of school because he was a small student. And he's a big man now. And the young man was tasked to crawl in through the sheriff's elevator's chamber and crawl over into where the judge was. And this is like a small, some grammar school age child. And was able to get over there because of his size and determine that the judge was alive, and they were able to get him out. But Judge Anderson did pass away a day or two later in the hospital where I was born, the Webb Williamson Hospital here. And it was just an unusual thing. And after we moved that portrait over to the courthouse, the security people who were right there in the center of the courthouse said that about every day for a long time something went wrong with that elevator. after his portrait was put there in the courthouse.
Well, the part of this story that the part of the story that I thought was fascinating was the young man. Is it true that, I mean, no one else could get in there except for a very small child because of the size of the little tunnel that provided access to that elevator shaft?
Because there are two elevators together, the one that's public and the one that the sheriff used, and he crawled into the sheriff's elevator, and I don't know how they got him out of there, but they may have injured him more pulling him out once they found out he was okay. I mean, he wasn't okay, but he was alive enough that they could move him out.
What was that young man's name?
Lawrence Taylor. He was called Meatball in high school. He's my brother's age, and he was associated with the country, our country. My brain doesn't work here.
Old Country Store.
Old Country Store for many years, and he is a great ping pong player extraordinaire. Now,
well, what's on your plate next after the magistrate judge?
I'm gonna find something to do. I'm gonna work. I've worked all my life legally. I'm gonna do something, and I've got some things in mind, but they're not. They've got to fall into place. Otherwise, I may end up with a law firm or something like that somewhere. We'll see. But I don't think Waterpin Hall is there any longer. They used to catch me all the time.
Okay. Thank you,
Good.
Judge
Well,
Bryant.
thank y'all. Y'all have been very generous and helpful. And
thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Listen, I got my notes here.